Hi, everyone.
Hello. Alexander Maclaren wrote a sermon called The Stupidity of Godlessness, and he's deriving his text from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 3. In the NIV here, it reads this way.
The ox knows his master, the donkey his owner's manger, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand.
There's the way it renders this same text in the ESV. Hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib. And Maclaren says about this is primarily an indictment against Israel, but it touches us all. Doth not know, that is, has no familiar acquaintance with. Doth not consider, that is, frivolously ignores, never meditates on. This is a common attitude of mine towards God. Blank indifference towards him is far more frequent than conscious hostility. Take 100 men at random as they hurry through the streets, and how many of them would have to acknowledge that no thought of God had crossed their minds for days or months? So far as they are concerned, either in regard to their thoughts or actions, he is a superfluous hypothesis. Most men are not conscious of rebellion against him, and to charge them with it does not rouse conscience. But they cannot but plead guilty to this indictment. God is not in all their thoughts.
This is strange and unnatural. That a man should be able to forget God and live as if there were no such being is strange. It is one instance of that awful power of ignoring the most important subjects, of which every life affords so many and tragic instances. It seems as if we had above us an opium sky which rains down, how do you say that?
Soporifics?
Yeah, soporifics.
Drugs?
Okay. So that we are fast asleep to all that it most concerns us to wake to. But still stranger is it that, having that power of attending or not attending to subjects, we should so commonly exercise it on this subject. For as the ox that knows the hand that feeds him, and the ass that makes for his master's crib, where he is sure of fodder and straw, might teach us, the stupidest brute has sense enough to recognize who is kind to him, or has authority over him, and where he can find what he needs. The godless man descends below the animal's level, and to ignore him is intensely stupid. But it is worse than foolish, for this attitude is voluntary and criminal.
It's worth noting probably that Maclaren is writing many of these sermons at the time when atheism is becoming fashionable in England and the Western world. This is in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. This attitude is voluntary and criminal. Though there is not conscious hostility in it, the root of it is a subconscious sense of discordance with God and of antagonism between his will and the man's. When we are quite sure that we love another and that hearts beat in accord and wills go out towards the same things, we do not need to make efforts to think of that other, but our minds turn towards him or her as to a home. Whenever released from the holding back force of necessary occupations, if we love God and have our will set to do his will, our thoughts will fly to him as doves to their windows. It is fed by preoccupation of thought with other things. We have but a certain limited amount of energy, of thought or attention, and if we waste it, as much as most of us do, on things seen and temporal, there is none left for the unseen realities and the God who is eternal, invisible. It is often reinforced by theoretical uncertainty, sometimes real, often largely unreal. But after all, the true basis of it, that is godlessness, is what Paul gives as its cause. They did not like to retain God in their knowledge.
the criminality of this indifference. It is heartlessly ungrateful. Dogs lick the hand that feeds them. Ox and ass in their dull way recognize something almost like obligation arising from benefits and care. No ingratitude is meaner and baser than that of which we are guilty, if we do not requite him in whose hand our breath is, and whose are all our ways, by even one thankful heart-throb, or one word shaped out of the breath that he gives. This attitude is fatal. It separates us from God, and separation from him is the very definition of death. A God of whom we never think is all the same to us as a God who does not exist. Strike God out of a life, and you strike the sun out of the system, and wrap all in darkness and weltering chaos. This is life eternal, to know thee. But if Israel doth not know, Israel has slain itself. Now, it's made me think of the term practical atheism.
Practical atheism. Well, polls go on telling us that, usually in the West even, it's between 80 and 90% of people who say they believe in God. Mm-hmm. But do they live their daily lives as if they do believe? Mm-hmm. I can't help but think that Maclaren, who spoke these words, yes, in the late Victorian era, preached in Manchester, the center of the Industrial Revolution. He was watching a city, a bunch of cities, but he was in Manchester. Mm. He's watching them develop and grow exponentially, and godlessness go right on growing in the midst of this industrial plenty. Yeah. For most people, industrialization was just another excuse to live in a stupor spiritually. Yeah. Some people didn't have a choice because of the industrial age and the.
Yeah. Well, I think the design of cities is, and it's probably not as bad in England, maybe it is now, but it wasn't before, where at least you could still see nature, you could still see the country. But I would say a lot of cities effectively block God out.
Yeah.
So that when you go outside, you don't see the sky, you don't see trees and grass and fields. You have to pursue that. So that makes me think of during the years when we ran our bookstore, we had to travel outside of the place where we lived, and we would always take the route of the country roads rather than the highway. Mm-hmm. And I immediately felt a difference. I always felt like those little trips, which were about weekly, were feeding my soul.
Yeah. And they were putting money on the table.
Yeah.
And food on the table. We tried to combine the two.
But you couldn't help but be awed or thankful and want to pray or worship or express thankfulness when you saw a lot of sky, fields, grass, animals. It was just such a pleasure. You really felt a difference in your spirit.
Praise came spontaneously under those circumstances. We used to even choose our garage sale and church sale system to build the book business. This was our habit every Saturday. We used to choose the route, both there and back, based upon our little half an hour in the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was something that kept us spiritually alive during the time of Max's development. When he was a little guy in the car seat, we used to go back and forth and talk about nature as well as about stuff. And
blow the cobwebs out.
Yeah, we blow those city cobwebs out. After all, we were living in the third biggest metropolis in North America after Los Angeles and New York. We wanted to link to a video you just found the other day.
Well, Max found it and sent it on to us. So I think you'll see the reason why we think it illustrates
Isaiah's point?
Animals and man and their...
The natural relationship of animals and man?
Yeah.
It's about an older man and some raccoons. You may have seen it already. And we also wanted to link to another rather bearish man, Tom Wright.
Cuddly.
A cuddly man, yeah.
Yeah.
Something he wrote about paganism and its natural link to idolatry.